So I am back in this project we set up in the last module. You find it attached. Make sure to run npm install and start your server with npm run serve if you just downloaded it. And you should see this on the screen on localhost 8080 here. So this is the dummy application we worked thus far, and we're using a component here. We're using the friend contact component, which we define here in main.js with app component. Now this friend contact component has one problem. It has one flaw. The data which we're outputting here, the name of the friend, the phone number, the email address, all of that is stored here inside of the component in this friend data property. Now that's a pattern we used a lot throughout this course. We stored the data a Vue app needs inside of that app. But for components, it often is a bit different. There, you sometimes want to create a reusable component, which contains the markup and certain logic, like here, the logic for toggling the list with help of the button. So that should be part of the component. But some data should be received from outside. And with from outside, I mean that the app or component which is using this component, so in our case, our main app here where we are using that component, that app here should pass data into our component so that when we use our component twice, we can use it with different data in each component instance, so in each HTML element we're creating here. So that the first contact outputs the data about manual, and the second time we use the component, we, for example, output data about Julie. That would be great if we could use a component like this, if we could use it as a reusable and configurable HTML element. And at the moment, it's kind of reusable, but every usage contains the same data, which is why we see manual Lawrence twice. Now, of course, there is a solution for this, because this is such a crucial concept. Being able to configure the same component with different data when you use it multiple times, that is a core concept, and therefore it is something we can implement with Vue, with a concept called props. Now, what are props about? Props is short for properties, and you can think of props like custom HTML attributes. For example, here in app.vue, it would be nice if we could pass data to our first friend contact. Let's say we would pass in the name, and that would be Manuel Lawrence. We would pass in the phone number, and that would be some number here. And we would pass in the email address, and that would be manuel@localhost.com, for example. And I'm going to hit that reformat shortcut to reformat it into this more readable version here. But it would be nice if we could use our friend contact component like this. And then here for the second friend contact component usage, we could pass in the same attributes, but with different data. So we could copy that and add it here. But now on that second friend contact, pass in Julie Jones with some data of our choice here, and here Julie at localhost. It would be nice if we could use it like this. Now, if we save that, it works, but of course we don't see that data on the screen. Because yes, indeed, you can set your own attributes, those so-called props, on components, but in order to use them inside of the component, you also need to write some code inside of the component file. So in this case, inside of friend contact. You basically should make Vue aware of the attributes, of the props that you want to accept on your component. So in our case, we want to make Vue aware of name, of phone number, and of email address. And we can make Vue aware of this by going to our component file, into the config object, and by adding a specific new key here, a new property which we haven't learned about before. the props property. And in its simplest form, this takes an array. I'm saying in its simplest form because we will later also learn about different ways of using that. But in the simplest form, we pass in an array, and in here, we should now specify all the props, so all the custom attributes, you could say, we want to accept on this component. And in our case, that would be name, phone number, and email address. So we could add name as a string. You add your props as strings to this array. So we add name, and then phone number, written like this. I'll come back to that in a second. And email address, also written like this. Now, why is phone number and email address written like this? Because what we define here as props will be available just like data properties in this entire Vue component, including in the template. So we could now refer to this with the this keyword. Here in the method, if we needed it, we could refer to this phone number, for example. And that's why we write it like this and not with a dash, because with a dash, this would be an invalid JavaScript property name. This would be invalid JavaScript code. And therefore, props in your component should be defined in this camel case. And Vue automatically translates props defined like this into versions like this with a dash. So using this kebab case with a dash between words. And indeed, in your HTML template, you should use this kebab case notation. So here you should not use phone number, but phone dash number to be in line with the rest of your HTML code, which also uses lowercase kebab case syntax. Might sound confusing at first, but it is really simple. In your HTML code, use this kebab case for props. In your component, when you define the props this component receives, use camel case instead. But the more important takeaway, besides that notation, is how that works. Now we're letting Vue know that our friend contact component has free props which it wants to receive. So free custom attributes which can be set when that component is used as an HTML element like we're doing it here. And now inside of that component, inside of the component file, we can work with these free props. As I just explained, we can work with them just as we can work with data properties. So inside of our JavaScript code, we can use this to access the different props. Or, of course, in our template, we can use them as well. And now we can say that here, we want to output name, just name, not props.name or this.name, but just name. Just like we're using details are visible here, which is a data property. We use props in exactly the same way. And therefore, as a side note, you should of course make sure that you don't have any name clashes there. If you define something as a prop, you shouldn't use the exact same name in your data properties or computed properties. That's just a side note. But now here we can use name, here we can use phone number, and here we can use email address like this. And if we do that and save it all, now we see the component twice, but now every component works standalone and has its own data. And that is the amazing part here. That's the amazing thing. This now hopefully shows you why components are such a great concept in Vue and in programming in general. Now we can define the markup and the logic for our component once, but then use it as often as needed with different kinds of data in our other components or in our main app as we're doing it here. We built our own HTML element with its own markup and its own logic, and we made it configurable to ensure that the same element can be used multiple times with different data. So props is a core concept. We're going to use it all the time throughout the entire course, and it's the core concept to make components really useful and really powerful.